I got off the number 7 bus and started the 3-block walk to my house. I didn't have a car. Hell, I could barely afford food most of the time, so a car was nothing more than a pipe dream. I didn't have an education either. My parents moved the summer after 6th grade and never bothered to enroll me in a new school. They were very much into the 60s lifestyle and thought I would get a better education from everyday life in the real world than any school. It didn't really work out. So now I'm 19 years old and living on the streets with no marketable skills. And of my possessions, all I have is an old acoustic guitar and a few changes of clothes. I carry my clothes with me in a backpack and my guitar slung over my shoulder. I'm average height, about 5 feet 9 inches, and noticeably thinner than I should be. But that's more due to lack of food than anything else. In terms of intelligence, I'm also about average. I could probably accomplish something, but I don't have much drive. That's something my parents taught me. Most of the time, you can find me on a street corner playing some tune and trying to get by on whatever donations kind people decide to throw my way. And usually it's enough to survive, but not enough to get out of the life I'm living. But a couple weeks ago, this lady came over to where I was playing and listened to me for about 30 minutes. She gave me a $5 tip and then asked if I could teach her how to play guitar. I explained that I could, but it would take a long time, and was surprised when she agreed and offered to pay me $10 each week, plus bus fare for an hour lesson. So we walk 3 blocks to a very nice house in an upscale neighborhood. Vagrants like me are usually chased out of this place, and the first time I was here, someone called the police on me. I explained why I was here, and they took me to Miss Betty's house where she confirmed why I was here. I haven't had any problems since then, but I have no doubt that people are always watching me and ready to call the police. Miss Betty is a very nice woman. She is in her early 30s. I didn't ask exactly, and she didn't name it. Has curly blonde hair and a plump body. She usually wears loose house robes in the house, at least when I'm there, so I can't tell you much else. We've been doing this for weeks, months even, and every week it's been about the same. She would meet me at the door and offer me something to eat or drink. Sometimes I'd accept, but I didn't want to inflame her generosity, so usually I'd just get a glass of water. Her husband was a real estate developer of sorts. The Concrete Castle King was what we called them on the streets because they built everything and ran us poor people down to raise their property values. They had been married for 7 years and had 2 small children. Miss Betty always invited me over to her house at the same time and on the same day every week. And in time, I realized that she was trying to keep herself busy while her husband played cards and drank with friends in their den, and the children visited one of the grandparents weekly. The first time I came, I asked her what she wanted to learn, so I could teach her what she wanted to know. Her answer I remember to this day. "I want to learn a love song," she said. "I want to learn something filled with happiness. I want to learn to play the guitar so I can hear my beautiful children sing." I tried to teach her a few simple chords, but nothing complicated. She learned them well, and we tried learning an easy tune, but I realized she wasn't really drawn to it. I got the feeling that she was a very lonely woman, and was more willing to pay for my company than anything else. We spent a lot of time just talking. She constantly questioned me about my life, both as a child and now that I found myself on the streets. I had a whole bunch of hobo stories piled up, and I told her one after another. We talked about the dreams we each had when we were young, and she tried to convince me to keep chasing mine. I promised I would, but they were empty promises. I knew I would never be anything in life, and I didn't think it was worth trying. She told me about her life as well. She loved her husband, but he spent most of his time with his business associates. She was raising the children, and he was the breadwinner. This was not an uncommon attitude these days. She was single most of the time, and when she mentioned this to her husband, he brushed it off, explaining that his job was to provide for his family, not to take care of the children, and certainly not to keep a grown woman company. He did his part of the job and expected her to do hers. Sometimes we would just chat while I strummed my guitar, but more often than not, she just wanted to hear me play guitar. I was always afraid of being too loud since her husband was in the next room. I had a feeling he was a very dominant man, perhaps even abusive, and I didn't want to be the one to piss him off. I tried repeatedly to talk her into trying to learn, but she resisted. "I want to hear you sing and play. Maybe I'll get a chance to learn that love song before you leave, but right now, I'd rather just listen to you. And that's what we did every week. Conversation and my playing. It went on like this for weeks, and I didn't need to be particularly observant to notice that this was the highlight of her week. At first I would sit on the couch and she would sit in the chair next to me, but as the weeks went by and she got more comfortable with me, she started sitting next to me on the couch. I loved it when she did that. I could smell the beautiful perfume she used and sometimes get lost in her soulful, deep blue eyes. She was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen, and I'd seen many passing me on the streets, but she did her best to minimize it. It was shameful, really. Mentally, I knew she was more than 10 years older than me, but that didn't matter to my heartstrings. I began to have feelings for her in spite of myself. It was ridiculous, of course, but you can't help what you feel. Late at night, trying to fall asleep in the shelter or whatever alley I took refuge in, I sometimes imagined that I had succeeded as a musician and had taken her away from her miserable, lonely life. But reality always intruded on my fantasies. I knew I was nothing more than entertainment for her. Sure, she was well off financially and loved her husband despite the way he treated her. No, it would all remain just a fantasy. And so I knocked on her door again. At first, I thought everything was the same, but I quickly realized one very significant difference. There was not a sound coming from the den, not a sound at all. If she realized that I knew about it, she didn't say anything, but offered me something to eat and drink, as she always did. When my husband wasn't home, I felt a little braver and asked for a sandwich plus my usual water. Her smile said she was pleased with my request, and she went into the kitchen to make it. We talked while I ate. I deliberately avoided questions about her husband, and she never once broached the subject. The mood in the room had clearly lightened with his departure, and I wasn't about to spoil that good mood. Finally, she asked me to turn on some music, and I just started playing. Usually, I tried to talk her into picking up the guitar and giving it a try, but today was different, and I didn't bother this time. After each song, we talked some more while I decided which song to play next, and then I played that one too. When the house was empty, I really let go of my inhibitions, started singing louder, and really immersed myself in the music. At one point, my voice started to give out, and a glance at my watch showed that I had been singing, playing, and talking for almost 5 hours. Her husband hadn't shown up once. I set the guitar aside in exhaustion and couldn't even bring myself to speak. My voice was tired and exhausted. Miss Betty looked concerned, as if she wanted to say something but just remained silent. The silence, as they say, was deafening. By now, Betty was sitting next to me, putting her foot on my leg. I don't think she had ever sat so close to me before, and the feel of her body next to mine, even though we were both fully clothed, sent goosebumps running through my body. I had mentioned before how beautiful her eyes were, but I had never seen them so close. They were so expressive, and it was those eyes, more than anything else, that seemed to be trying to tell me something. I felt a little uneasy. I could definitely feel my heart beating and could swear I could hear hers too. I looked into her eyes and felt myself being drawn in. There was something about the way she was looking at me that wouldn't let me look away. I felt like I needed to run and hide, but there was nowhere to run, even if I could somehow get away from her. I guess my gaze must have told her something too, or maybe she was just tired of waiting for me to do something, because after a few minutes, she just stood up. She started unbuttoning the clasps on her house robe, and it wasn't until a few seconds later that I realized she was naked underneath. When she was halfway done, I could see the sides of her exposed heavy breasts. She undid the last clasp, and the homemade robe fell to the floor. I could hear her breathing getting heavier as her arousal began to build, and my body responded in kind. Taking my hand, she led me down the hallway until we reached the master bedroom. We walked further and went into the bathroom, where Betty opened the shower door and turned on the water. As it warmed up and I took off my socks, I stepped into the shower and enjoyed the feel of the spray washing away layer after layer of dirt from my body. God, I swear I've never been so clean. She soaped up a bar of soap and scrubbed every inch of my body. She even washed my hair. I had never experienced anything like that before. The times I'd been with other girls had just been a physical need, a way to turn each other on. But this was so much more than that. I realized I had feelings for this woman. Was it love? Real damn love? I don't know for sure, but at that moment it felt like it. I felt like I was working in a Hollywood movie or living out a good bad dream. When I washed myself, she handed me the soap and moved the hair off my neck. All of this was done without words. She easily conveyed exactly what she wanted. I lather up the soap and began to scrub. I started with her smooth shoulders. They were so soft, not stiff like the girls I knew. Apparently, Miss Betty lived a largely sheltered life, and the harshness of the outside world was something other people faced. When she finally came to her senses, she turned off the water and we stepped out of the shower. We dried ourselves thoroughly, taking our time to get it right, and then she led me to her bed. I got the feeling that she was normally submissive to her husband, and I realized that she intended to dominate me. Not in a cruel way, but just that she wanted to control everything. She pushed me down on the bed. Betty and I spent most of the night having sex and then making love, and the frenzy of our first liaison eventually gave way to love and tenderness as we lay in bed together. She never mentioned her husband, and I never asked. Silly, I guess, but I figured she was a mature woman and I was an immature child, so I took her example. Some of the girls I dated were truly beautiful and were the object of desire for everyone who saw them. Many of them probably could have become models in the world of beauty and glamour if their lives had turned out differently, but none of them touched me the way Betty did. At that moment, after one night with this woman, I felt I had grown up. It took another man's wife in real life to make a man out of that boy. The next morning, I decided it was time for me to leave and started packing my things. She watched me in silence, just as she had the night before, until I had all my things packed, and then she finally spoke. "I want to thank you," she said. That struck me as ridiculous. If anyone had to thank anyone, it was my gratitude to her. She had done so much for me, giving me a steady, albeit meager income, and of course what had happened last night. I couldn't imagine what she was thanking me for, so I asked, "For what, Betty?" "For teaching me how to sing a love song." Of course, I'd never made her play guitar, but I knew exactly what she meant. I just smiled, then picked up my backpack and guitar and headed for the door to start making my way to the bus stop, realizing that things would be back to normal next week. I only walked a couple steps down the path. "My husband won't be back for another 3 days. You can stay at my place for a couple more nights." "I think you know I stayed."